Hello, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to talk about part 4 of a series we're working through trying to explain some of the background, the biblical background, and then what happens when we get into NESARA. Coming right up. Okay, so we've already talked about my miracle healing. It sets up some issues. We talked about Satan trying to defraud the event. We also moved into the Antichrist, or this jab thing that is really about bringing in the mark without the beast. That can't happen. So when we come to this issue, and this is now when we fast forward a little bit into March, April of 2020, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. I can't figure out what's happening. Patients are not showing up in the door. I'm still researching a lot about the issues, but let me tell you what occurred that made me go into a unique direction. See, the PPP loans, the Payroll Protection Act, or whatever it is, PPP, was written through the CARES Act. The CARES one that no one pays any attention to. It was early, I think it was in February to March, and it was literally 1,000 pages. None of these idiots read it. I have a friend of mine who passed away about 1.5 years ago, and she read it because she was an IRS agent. She actually was so deep in IRS when she was alive. She worked in Cincinnati. She had to read all the information that Congress would put forward, and she would have to put it into IRS-ease so that people could pay for this. And she read it, and it was perfect from front to back. It was literally perfect. And she goes, that doesn't normally happen on a piece of legislation. Not even 2 or 3 weeks later, they come up with the second CARES Act, which is the PPP loans. And it's 1,200 pages, and it's referencing things from a dozen years ago. And she goes, again, it's perfect. Now, let me tell you, there's a book over here called Revelations of the Red Pill. I wrote that in December 21. It was the quickest book I ever wrote. I mean, I think it was 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, I'm busting a gut to get that thing out there. And it was very difficult to kind of move through and put the references and everything in there because I felt a real need to get it out there with that. Now, there's no way, I don't care what you do, there is no historical precedent of any type that anyone can put out a piece of writing in perfection in less than 2 weeks, 2-3 weeks. And then that for the second CARES Act to get to a third CARES Act, which is 1,400 pages. See, these things were planned way in advance. One article that I reference in this first book called NESARA and the Mark of the Beast was an article that kind of got really upset. The author in there was talking about how the Fed was obviously supposed to be outside of the system, which is part of the sickness of our situation. And that Trump, when he helped with this situation, especially the CARES Act and the PPP loan, he shoved it underneath the Treasury Department. And it had never been underneath the Treasury Department. There's a connection between the two, but it's only just a facade connection. But he shoved it underneath when he created the PPP Act and the CARES, the big part of the CARES too. Now, let me kind of tell you what happens with the PPP loans. When I was first looking at the PPP loans, it didn't make any sense. And over half the people I'd talked to for a long time actually never, or a lot later, filled out the PPP loans. Now, as a business owner, what that is trying to do is you have to show your articles of incorporation. You have to do several other little points, but one of the major issues you have to do is show that you have payroll. It's no big deal. I can show that on my stuff because I was paying all my employees even before I got the PPP loan. But it had several key features that weren't there. Now, I had been a part of working with hearing aid manufacturers who would loan me money not through a bank, but a very unique way. But there was always a repayment penalty, a repayment structure. It had a time frame of 5 years or whatever it was that we would pay under a 5% loan and blah, blah, blah. And there was always a credit check and a personal guarantee. Now, my primary business is an S corporation. The personal guarantee is piercing the corporate veil. That's what personal guarantee does. So that even if the corporation goes away, they can go right down to the person and get their money. Okay? It's just a commonality of some business loans. Most business loans. Now, when we started looking at the PPP loan, I'm working with Region Bank here in Tulsa. And I remember talking to the bank VP about some of this stuff, and I'm like, I don't get it. What do you mean we don't have to fill out a credit check? What's the repayment structure? Well, it's 5%, but I never even heard the years because it was nowhere listed on the paperwork with that. They had it out there, but basically, if you paid your employees with that information over about 80% over an 8-week period of time, and then they forget it, we'll just go to the end of the year. You had tons of time to do this. You were paying the loan. Like, what? And then I don't have to pay it back? So there was no repayment penalty because they were expecting you to utilize it for that. There was no worry about the payments. See, payments have to start within 30 to 60 days because that's how they make their money. Never happened. They were just waiting for you to end the time frame. Now, if you didn't do your process, then you would get charged that kind of thing. But they were expecting you just to be straightforward with them. Now, one of the things I love about Region Bank here in Tulsa is they were after every single person to make sure that they filled the paperwork out, and they would bounce them out if they filled the paperwork in correctly. There was no personal guarantee, there was no credit check, there was no repayment situation, there was no other kinds of situations, and I'm going, wait a second, how do you make money off of me? And I started finding, and it was not just from them, but many other banks, they were getting a fee from the Small Business Association, which is through the Treasury. But normally, SBA gets it through a bank. So the bank gets, when you do an SBA loan, the bank is making the interest, but they're just kind of a little guarantor in the process with them. So there's a whole process that occurs in there, and it wasn't happening. Even further, if they finalized the loan, and it was like a 2-page little form, and I was scared to do it. I had my accountant do it. It was a 2-page thing. Boom, thing goes through. Like a week and a half later, the thing is done, and they get paid. I don't get it. I don't understand. Who's giving me money? And I got not just one, but I got 2 PPP loans. That was the only thing that saved my bacon. And on top of that, the bank gets 2 amounts over here too. And so they're double dipping to this, I'm double dipping to that, and going, so who's paying them and who's paying me, and no one has to pay it back. And it was one of the most weird circumstances in the history of the world, and that's what made me go deep into a dive. And when we understand the PPP loan crushed the cabal. They crushed them. They hijacked the cabal, which was a private organization of the Fed, shoved them underneath the Treasury Department, and defunded them at the same event. Now, let me finish up a little bit of this part here too. Right around the same time frame, I got a call from my mortgage broker I've known for 25 years. Good friend of mine, George Taylor. And George calls me up, he goes, well, I can save you a bunch of money on your loan. We can get you 2.75 30-year fixed. Okay, let's do it. And it's going to save me like $180 a month. But right around the same time frame, everyone's filling out paperwork and no one can get it in time. Normally those things are done in like 45 days at most, 30 days really. And it's going on for like 3.5 months. I'm going, where's my loan? Don't I need to pay it? Because as long as you don't have the paperwork, you don't have to worry about it. Never had an issue. Credit wasn't even affected with that. But it was just big, weird delay. So I still haven't gotten the loan information from this private situation, but I get a weird piece of paper. And the piece of paper says, We're Fannie Mae. We bought your loan. Don't pay us anything. Pay the mortgage company when you get the paperwork. And I go to him and he's like, I'd never seen that before. And then he kind of backtracks to me later on. He goes, well, loans are bought by the Fed all the time, the Fed bankers. And I'm like, yeah, but they never admit that. And I talked to other people and they said, yeah, it's happening all over the world. I've done a whole bunch of refinances and a whole bunch of house purchases, and never once has it ever happened, which means that my house is sitting in the Fed. And it was giving you a clue of what was happening. And we're going to talk more about the Fed and the nature of the Fed and how the NESARA piece is actually so endemic. And because Satan was trying to hijack the process, they got killed and crushed in here. I said this to a woman here, and I said, she was really struggling with things, and I said, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. And I believe I want to say it's Romans 16. You might catch me on that one, but I think it's Romans 16. But the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. And I think we're actually in that time frame of crushing Satan. Now, obviously it happened in the spirit realm, but it's happening now. I hope that helps you.